Hello there. I am Katelynn Johnson, the founder and director and 0 to 3 guide here at Montessori Mother Early Learning Center in Berlin, Germany. And you are about to watch my workshop called Preparing a Toddler Classroom Environment, which is a step-by-step guide on how to plan out and prepare and arrange materials in the toddler classroom environment or any toddler community space. So this workshop is one part of a much larger online course, which is all inclusive for teachers or parents or administrators who want to open their own Montessori 0 to 3 program or parent-child learning center. And the course is designed to give everything that you need to start your school within 1 year. So all of the financial planning, business planning, environment planning, how to teach the classes, all of these things are part of the course. And today I also included a lot of PDF resources for you in the description, which include a checklist for materials and furniture, a guide, like a chart for stages of language development, and also a guide for how to make and present practical life activities for toddlers, and the slides and the pictures, and also a 10% discount code if you want to join the full-length course. So I hope you enjoy today's workshop video, and I wish you good luck on your project. Today, we are continuing the topic of planning and preparing the Montessori environment and focusing on the toddler classroom. Much of the furniture is the same as in the baby classroom, so a large part of today's lesson will focus on the materials that are used with walking children and their aims. We will go over changes in the environment setup, the practical life stations in the classroom, additions to the language area, and key materials for the sensitive periods in the toddler development timeline. Here is the layout you saw yesterday of the Nido classroom on the left, and on the right is the same environment in our school after it's been changed to the setup for a toddler class. As you can see, there are many consistencies, but the following changes have been made. So the movement mats have been replaced by toddler tables and chairs. The shelf designations are different, meaning the materials that are assigned to each shelf in each zone of the environment. The gross motor movement structure is different, the climbing structure or balance beam, whatever it is that week. And of course, all of the materials are going to be different. The child work tables are essential to the toddler environment. Every table is for individual work, besides the large group table, which we use for snack time or group projects, for example, baking projects. You can also just use the small toddler tables and rearrange them for the group snack time. And in addition to the work tables, you need a set of small working mats for the children to use on the floor. Every time a child is working with a material from the shelf, they either take it to an available table, or first they take a work mat, unroll it, and then they bring their material to the mat. This serves several purposes. Firstly, the child is able to sit down and focus without being distracted by their body's movements or other materials that may be close by. The materials are treated with care and respect, so we don't use them straight on the floor. The child's workspace is defined, so all of their work stays organized in this small, clear area. And the other children in the class can then see clearly that a material is in use and that a space is being occupied, and so it's not available to them or anyone else. This is how they learn to pay attention to the other children in the group and respect the activities of those other children with this clear visual indicator. If a child is working at a table or a mat, their materials are not available to the others. The main shelves in the toddler environment are the following: art, practical life, language, eye-hand coordination, which is for puzzles, posting materials, the rings on bases, and other activities. There's the music shelf, which was also in the baby environment, food preparation, plant care, sensorial work, the shoes and dressing areas, perhaps a toddler wardrobe, several bookshelves, a shelf for storing dishes and cleaning supplies just for the table and eating time, the woodworking bench and the tools, which could be on a shelf or on a wall display, the self-care area, and the gardening area if you have a garden, of course. Gross motor materials for toddlers can be the same as the ones you use in the Nido classroom, such as the wooden stairs and the pickler bridge. But if you have the space and you have the budget, there are a lot of other materials you can consider, such as this balance beam, a climbing dome, these colorful stepping stones, a mini trampoline, a rock climbing wall, which could be inclined or vertical. You can have a pulley system for maximum effort, which is mounted to the ceiling, a slide. There can be materials for pushing, like a wheelbarrow or a wooden carriage, or pulling materials like a wooden toy with wheels or a wagon. In your outdoor space, you could also have materials for riding, like a very light walking bike. I've seen teachers use this wooden sit and spin or a contained climbing structure. I've even seen one school that had a loft from the ceiling with a kind of hammock made of rope. There are all kinds of fun things that could be used in an indoor or an outdoor space, like ladders, monkey bars, platforms just for jumping. It's not necessary to have a lot of these materials because the toddlers probably have many opportunities in their day-to-day life to go to playgrounds, to ride bicycles, and things like that. But the reason that we must include at least some gross motor activities in the toddler classroom is because the toddlers sometimes just need to move their bodies between presentations so they can let out extra energy before they're able to focus on their work. Or maybe they're in the period where they have to apply maximum effort, and so they need some of these materials to exercise their growing physical capacity. And they also benefit the parents because the parents can observe their child's abilities, and the teacher is there to support the parents who need to build trust in their child and work through any anxiety they might be experiencing as their child is learning to climb and jump and do all of these things that they weren't doing before. The practical life stations in the classroom in the toddler environment are very important, as you will see in the practical life guide that's in your homework section. These are materials which are not located on the shelf. We do have a practical life shelf with some materials on trays, but the stations themselves are located on special tables where the child will work sometimes while they're sitting, but usually while they're standing. The key practical life stations are hand washing at the sink, filling pitchers and pouring water at the sink, a hand washing station which is there just for fun, where they use a basin to wash their hands. They can also use this hand washing station after they did some painting and maybe they want to wash their hands again. There's a dishwashing and drying area, a similar area for washing cloths and drying them. We also have a table washing cart. pictured there on the bottom right, where they can wheel it around to any table that needs to be washed. You can have an ironing table, a flower arranging table, of course, the area above for drinking water that's coming from a dispenser. There's the woodworking area, self-care area, place where they can use the potty or practice using the potty, and the toddler kitchen. Just like in the Nido classroom, at least one material should be available to the child which supports the repetition and mastery of each developmental milestone they experience. Toddlers also have very clear external expressions of the sensitive periods they are going through. These could also be called key development windows or windows of opportunity. But for example, the sensitive period for developing language begins in utero and it continues through the 6th year of life. But toddlers experience an explosion of language, both in their comprehension of language and their expression of language in their 2nd year. So in response to their need for learning language, we have an extensive area in the classroom, and the teacher needs to be aware of these stages when they're coming up, so they're also ready to make any moment during the class a language learning moment or a full language presentation with the child, anywhere in the class with anything the child expresses interest in hearing about. And you will see all about these language stages in the 2nd page of the language development timeline that was shared in the previous lesson. So some of the materials that we include in the language area are books, of course, language objects and cards, and stereognostic bags. But we also give language through open-ended conversations with the verbal children. We use sign language with nonverbal children. We give these spontaneous 3-period lessons during presentations, which means that we isolate nouns at the beginning of the presentations which have multiple steps. And as long as the child is enjoying those presentations, we can continue with the language element as long as the child is interested, before we even move on to the actual material that we were presenting. We sing songs with children. We can do poetry games, action games. Any moment during the day can be a beautiful language learning moment in the toddler class. There are quite a few guidelines to consider when you are assembling your child's library and book collection. First of all, the books must be displayed on an outward-facing shelf with space between each book. And we do this for several reasons. First of all, you don't want the books to be too high or overlapping, because that can cause them to fall on the child when they take them off the shelf. Also, the books should be very easy to take off and place on the shelf for a small child, and the shelf should not obscure the cover of the book. The child needs to be able to see all the books that are available with their different topics and images so they can choose the ones they want to read. And we keep space between the books just like we do with the materials, so that the child will be more likely to choose one book that they want to look at and then return it to the shelf before they take another one, rather than just grabbing all the books and emptying the shelf completely, which they still might do, but they're supported when they can clearly see, oh, this is the space where the book came from. I'll put it back and take another one, supporting their need for order. The books need to be rotated according to the child's interest, just like all the materials. So you don't need to display all the books you have, but keep some in storage for future rotations. They should be rotated also according to their condition. So the books that are not receiving any attention from the children, or the ones that get damaged, those are the ones that should be replaced periodically. There should be no books that make noise or have flaps and textures or anything that's kind of toy-like, because books don't need to do anything. We are the ones who read and look at the books. The books that are more like toys are actually pretty distracting for the child, and they're not going to inspire a natural love of the simple act of reading. Next, the photos and illustrations in the book have to be realistic. The proportions of the pictures should also be realistic. So if there is a squirrel next to a nut, the nut cannot be the same size as the squirrel. If there's a whale and a clownfish, the clownfish needs to be much smaller than the whale. So the pictures also should not have any silly cartoons or animals wearing clothes, talking animals, or any kind of fantasy characters. The 0 to 3 child is not able yet to think critically to understand what is real or what is fantasy. Everything you tell them, they believe as the truth. So the books need to be truthful. In Montessori 0 to 3, we have a specific hierarchy of books that Dr. Montessori detailed herself. The first is an isolated image, one photo or illustration on each page with no text. Then you can have an isolated image with one or more words or a simple sentence. Next is one situation on each page. Then comes a very simple storyline book. Then a story which is a little bit more complex, but maybe it's only a picture book. And then you can have a story with text, which is a bit more complicated and follows a single sequence of events. This hierarchy also includes poetry books or just photo books from your school. You could make a photo book of the children in your course, like Simone Davies mentioned, that each child will love to look at. The parents can provide the photos for you, or you can just make a photo book of areas around your classroom or familiar objects to the child. They love to read about what is familiar to them. Similar to books, we also have a specific progression of puzzles. We start with one shape puzzles, then one figure puzzles, then puzzles with multiple shapes or the same shape in decreasing size, then the same figure in decreasing size, then puzzles with multiple figures, and finally parts of a whole puzzles or one figure with multiple pieces. Language objects and cards are essential to the child, both for expanding their vocabulary, but also for the categorization and abstraction skills that they're developing. When the child works with these materials, they learn the names of things, they figure out what kinds of things are grouped together and why, and how those things can be represented both as a real-world object, a three-dimensional replica, and a two-dimensional image. And we use the same word for all three of those things. For example, if I say apple, that can refer to a real edible fruit. It could refer to a wooden replica of an apple or a photo of an apple. And not only that, but there are all different kinds of apples, different colors of apples, and we use the same word to categorize all of these. Then there are all the different kinds of fruits and then vegetables and so on. This is just an example of how much the child is learning right now and how much mental work they have to do to understand everything in their world and apply a new language to that. When they learn a new word, it means all kinds of things, both to us and to them. So we have these different kinds of language objects to support the child in this learning process. All of these materials are presented directly to the child by the teacher. Of course, to learn language, they need to use these materials with someone else, a teacher or a parent or an assistant teacher. Every set is always categorized and should have only 3 to 7 objects. It could be with matching cards or without matching cards. And eventually they'll use the cards alone without the objects. They are language objects with an exact matching card, different objects with similarly matching cards. Maybe the object is a replica and the card is a real-life photograph. We also have real-life objects with matching cards, and then just the cards without matching the objects. And then there are the stereognostic bags. The stereognostic sense is the ability to understand what something is only by feeling it with the hands. So from your storage of language objects, you can choose a selection of stereognostic items, which means they are clearly perceptible as soon as you feel them. So for example, a toothbrush, a comb, a hair clip, and a washcloth. You can put these 4 items in a bag and show the child how to reach inside, close your eyes, name an object, and then pull it out and discover, wow, it's just what I thought it would be. It is a hairbrush. It's like magic to them. Before you even saw it, you could feel what this object was. And this is such a fun material for the toddlers to work with because their interest in language is increasing very rapidly, as well as the refinement of their tactile sense with their use of their hands. So we have 4 kinds of these stereognostic bags. The first is a general bag of random objects, stereognostic objects. The next one is a bag of classified objects, so all of those things that belong together, but they're still stereognostic. And then we have the pairing bags. So you can have 2 of each object, and they can be classified or random. You can use 1 bag or 2. With parents, I like to use 2 because 1 goes to the child and 1 goes to the parent. And it's like a really fun game for them to play. And the child learns so much from this. Of course, you do need to have at least 2 or 3 of these with different levels in the classroom. In addition to language, the biggest sensitive periods for toddlers, the ones that Maria Montessori writes about, and some more that I have observed over my years of working in the 0 to 3 classroom are movement, which is specifically walking and learning to walk passively or without thinking about it actively, and using maximum effort. Water is to explore water and then using water purposefully through pouring and cleaning. Cleaning on its own can be a sensitive period, and especially using tools to clean, such as mops and brooms and spray bottles. Next is the sensitive period for small objects, which is a fascinating sensitive period in the child's nature, which attracts them to tiny things and tiny details in order for them to train their fine motor skills. And the final one, it's not a sensitive period, but it's more of an innate human tendency, which is to seek functional independence. In the next slides, we'll go over each of these moments in the child's life and the key materials that you would use or that you could use in the classroom to support these important and universal learning requirements. So first is movement. When a baby starts to enter the toddler stage, you will notice them carrying objects from place to place. They might be crawling while they do this, but usually it correlates to the time when they're learning to walk. This is a really important way that the child practices focusing on what they're carrying or where they're carrying it to, rather than paying close attention to every step that they take. This activity is essential in their movement development. Another aspect of this is that they are repeating what they have seen in their environment, which is us adults constantly carrying things, moving them around. Possibly from the child's perspective, this is done completely without reason. So it's very important to the child to have the freedom to carry items, to move furniture and materials around. The ways that we support this need in the classroom is by using trays with the materials that have handles and that are small enough and easy for them to carry. We need to have a consistent place where every item is kept or displayed, and that supports their need for order, the other sensitive period for order, and this empowers the child to have responsibility over their space and keep the logical order of the classroom. In fact, if you change the order, you might find that the toddlers consistently return that material or that piece of furniture to its previous position, or they might even become frustrated that the thing that they're looking for is not where it's supposed to be as they had understood it. So you can prepare a specific material of which the purpose is carrying and moving a large item from one place to another. For example, when you wash a table, part of the presentation that you show to the child could be that the chair has to be carried across the room to make space for the child to wash around the table. And then after they've washed the table, they'll have to go back, get the chair, and bring it across the room again. Another idea is the pulley system I mentioned earlier, or filling bags with rice just for the purpose of loading and unloading, which is what you see in the picture here from my school. These are rice bags which I made that the toddlers are able to load and unload from their walking wagon. They serve two purposes: to weigh down the wagon so it will be heavy and more stable for the early walkers, and also give them this opportunity to use maximum effort. Of course, a small bag of rice is not heavy for us, but the child has to use two hands and use a lot of force to be able to pick these up and lift them over down into the wagon. When you notice a child moving furniture around, you can support them by presenting how to carry a chair with one hand on the back and one on the seat rather than dragging the chair. We call this a grace and courtesy presentation because you show the child how to be graceful in their movements, have controlled movements, and also be courteous to those around them because dragging a chair is quite loud and a disturbing noise. So if they carry them and put them down carefully, the noise is not disturbing anyone. That's how we can show courtesy to the others. And after they've moved everything they want to move, then they can move it all back. Another idea is that you can have a collection of wooden sculptures that the child uses for the wood polishing work. And the sculptures can be all different shapes and sizes and weights. And when the child is using this material, they have to cross the room to choose a sculpture and bring it back to its spot on the shelf after they've polished it. And back to this topic of maximum effort, this is just a time in the child's life when they are learning about their physical potential and weight and size. So how much strength is required to lift an empty box versus how much strength they need to use to carry a box which is full of rocks, for example. So it's very typical to see a child carrying something that's more than half their size, as you've probably seen in the past. And this indicates a significant universal need for toddlers to just use all of their physical power in a task. So no matter what, just make sure that there are heavy things in the classroom, heavy for the child, and that the children are allowed to move them and make sure there's a specific place where everything goes. A fixation on water is another huge sign that a baby is becoming a toddler. All of a sudden, they just become almost obsessed with it. Not necessarily bathing in water, but they love to figure out how to work at the sink, how to pour water, or how to use water for other activities. How to carry it without spilling, for example. They also love to experiment with volume and learn how to use a funnel. In fact, the need for working with water is pretty significant for the entirety of the toddler phase from start to finish. So that's why the Montessori toddler classroom includes many water activities. In your Google Drive folder or in your resource section for this lesson, you'll find a long list of activities that we use which are purposeful with water based on the child's age. And my recommendation is that the more activities you have with water, the better. I have found that when a toddler and a parent are struggling, especially if the toddler has any behavioral issues or deviations, the two things that will help that child to normalize or adapt to the environment are 1, food, or 2, water. Another key activity in a toddler's early days is cleaning. They just really want to do everything they see adults in their life do. So, although we do start introducing cleaning in the baby class, it just takes on a whole new level when they get to the toddler group. The cleaning materials are essential to them. Their attention to fine details allows them to spot messes very quickly, and their need to clean inspires them to attempt cleaning it up by themselves. And of course, this isn't perfect, and there's no guarantee that the area will be less messy after the child has cleaned it, but the joy, the pride, the satisfaction the child feels when they're able to see this process of a floor going from wet to dry, or a plate going from dirty to clean, a puzzle going from messy to orderly, just expresses how significant these materials are and these processes are to the small toddler. In the toddler class, cleaning is not something we do after an activity is complete. It is what we do to complete an activity, and often cleaning is the whole activity itself. The washing stations and materials are available for the child not only to clean dirty things, but just to practice the skills that result from cleaning. The table doesn't have to be dirty to wash it. The windows don't need to be smudged, but the child learns so much from these cleaning activities, way more than their parent might even realize. They learn how to follow a sequence of steps. They extend their attention span and they practice concentration. They use repetitive motion and control of movement. They're exploring texture and weight and smell and temperature while they're cleaning. They practice using tools or using both of their hands to do different tasks, and they satisfy essentially all of the sensitive periods for language, movement, water, small detail, order, functional independence through these practical life activities. So, of all the areas in the Montessori toddler classroom, the area for practical life is the most important and needs the most development. A large part of those practical life materials are cleaning. It also includes food preparation, woodworking, sewing, polishing, plant care, self-care, all of that. But cleaning is a big one. The attention to small objects is also one of the most important sensitive periods for toddlers that is overlooked or even discouraged in the toddler's life. Unfortunately, when a child picks up tiny stones or tries to hold a small bug or wants to take paper and rip it into tiny pieces, they are frequently interrupted by adults who are anxious about their safety. And while safety is definitely of the utmost importance, honoring the child's developmental need for using their fine motor skills is also extremely important. Toddlers need to use their hands to do things like pluck grapes from the stem, or use a needle to thread beads, to manipulate small stones, to pick up things as small as toothpicks. Their attraction to these tiny objects is not because they are forbidden, as is mistakenly assumed by the parent. It is because they are trying to train their fingers and refine their control of hand movement. So instead of forbidding the child from doing these things that they desperately need to do, we can take some precautions to make sure they have access to these materials. First, we need to keep count of the tiny objects so you know exactly how many pieces are in each material. For example, always keep just 10 rubber bands in the rubber band work, or 15 beads in the sewing box. Use small containers to contain the smallest parts of the material. So if the child is not yet able to open the container, you know that they're not ready to use the tiny items that are inside. You can keep the materials that are intended for older toddlers on the higher shelves, so they're only accessible when the child is actually tall enough to see them and reach them. If the child is still in the oral phase of exploration, they're still putting things in their mouth, you should only allow them to use the small materials when another teacher or parent or assistant is working with them so that they can be observed. They shouldn't use those on their own, obviously. And if a child is misusing a material or they try to put it in their mouth, which would be a misuse of it, then we of course have to put the material away with the child and then invite them to try again another day or the following week. And finally, make sure that you or any teacher in the classroom annually updates your first aid training for babies and toddlers, just in case of any accident. Encourage the parents to also take this training so that they can allow their child freedom in a safe environment without fear. And in the toddler material list, you will find a complete description of most of these materials that we have in our toddler classroom that include tiny objects and their individual containers or components. The focus of a toddler's life is functional independence. They just want to have full control of everything that we do to take care of ourselves. That includes getting dressed, washing, eating, brushing teeth and hair, blowing nose, putting on lotion, accessorizing, using the toilet, sleeping. I can go on and on. In the classroom, the child needs a prepared material for each of these day-to-day activities. In order to be able to complete them successfully, they need to practice, and they love to practice, and the materials have to be realistic. For example, you can have a dress-up area with real clothes, not play clothes. In this photo of our classroom, the toddler wardrobe includes a rain jacket, rain pants, rain boots, a rain hat, and an umbrella and socks. In our self-care area, we have several tissues in a box in front of this mirror with a basket for the discarded tissues, the used ones. And the tissues that we use are actually individual toilet paper squares, which are the perfect size for little toddler hands. And in the bathroom, our potty is really simple and it just looks like a normal toilet. The more adult-like the materials look, the more the child will be interested in them and enjoy using them. So I provided a checklist of the toddler furniture and materials, and the links that are included in this document, again, are just examples that are currently available or on sale at the time of this course from different places. So it's not a checklist of the exact things that you need to buy. It's just a guideline. As I mentioned, the key to finding or arranging the best materials for children is through observing them and constantly making improvements. And the best materials are usually, or very often at least, the ones that you carefully make yourself so that every detail can be perfect for the child. In fact, your homework this lesson is to make a Montessori practical life material for toddlers. This can be any material in the practical life area for a child between the age of 16 months to 3 years old. In your homework section, you will find a guide which explains the materials in great detail, what they are, how to prepare them, how to present them. I hope you enjoy creating your materials and practicing your presentations. And if you have any questions about the materials and homework, please feel free to reach out to me and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!